Welcome to We Question and Learn on WQLN Radio. This is Tom Pysz, celebrating our 16th year on the air. And today, a very, very, very special guest. This is an honor and a privilege for me. Bob Chitester is the founder and executive chairman of the board of Free to Choose Network, a 501c3 public foundation housing the Free to Choose Media Company, an award-winning global entertainment company which produces, distributes thought-provoking public television programs. And I'm going to go on and on and on. Rather than me describe how all this came to be, I'm stuttering a little, Bob, because I'm really honored to have you here. You were the founding father of WQLN. Do I have that part correct?
That is correct. I hold the honor of being the very first employee of WQLN, and also managed over a 2.5-year period with help from a lot of the local business people and the community at large, and the PTA clubs and groups, etc., to manage to put together the local funding necessary to match the state funding that was available for capital funding for equipment, and to put the station on the air in 1967.
I can't even imagine what that would have been like back then. If it probably feels like yesterday to you, huh? Possibly.
Well, not really. It actually feels like a different life. Is the way it's and partly because of so many roads I've traveled since, and each of them, in retrospect, I look back on often with some degree of mystery as to how I managed to pull things off, and yet at the same time recognizing that there was a narrative thread that flows through all of it, and it's basically that I just cannot resist the urge and drive to create things, and obviously to create media products, but also to create organizations, to create ideas, to create activities, and in the process to have the opportunity to interact with a large number of people. And a couple of interesting stories about the early days of WQLN.
Mm-hmm.
The effort to put the station on the air was a co-effort of the Northwest Regional what was it called? The Northwest Regional Educational Council, or whatever, and Educational Television of Erie, Pennsylvania. That was the name at the point at which I became involved.
Mm-hmm.
And I became involved because I came to Edinburgh State College at that time,
mm-hmm.
To work there to create a closed-circuit television system. And Tom Miller, who was the president of Edinburgh State College, he early on in one of our very first meetings mentioned, he said, there's this group locally that's been working to try to get an educational television station here in Erie, and he said, I'm as a college president, I'm a member. But he said, I don't know anything about this, so Bob, I want you to go and represent me.
Mm-hmm.
And it opened up an opportunity in a very interesting way, because no one else in any of the groups that were involved had any practical experience or any background at all in radio and television. So within within 2-3 months of my attending their meetings representing Tom Miller, they elected me president of the council. And I then began to work on a regular basis with John English, who was president of essentially what was a mothballed 501c3. I can give you a clearer sense of how mothballed is that I think John English was also at that point in time, was the only board member.
Hmm.
There had been 4 or 5 people, I think, who initially founded the educational television, and they did so in order to be sure to convince the FCC to reserve a channel for
Right.
Erie.
Mm-hmm.
But in any case, I'm working with John English on developing the station, and at one point, John said, "Well, Bob, we're getting close here, so we ought to think about hiring a general manager for the station." And my reaction was, "John, I agree with you, but I'm going to recuse myself because I'm going to apply for the job." And the next thing he said was, "Oh, well, if that's the case, Bob, you've got the job." Now, think about that in terms of I literally am handed what I had you asked me when I was at the University of Michigan as a radio and TV student, what my ultimate goal was, I think I would have answered being the head of a public TV station.
Oh,
and here I am within 3 years after that, or whatever, wasn't too long after that, that I was literally handed the keys to the station. But there was no station. They had $3,000 in the bank. And I quit a tenured position at Edinburgh to take the job, and basically offered the job with the idea that, okay, Bob, it's all yours, and if you want to be paid, you got to go raise the money. So off I went. I had no idea how difficult it might be or not, but I just dove into it because it just was an exciting opportunity.
Okay, so that opened up the television station.
That's right. And it took us quite a while, 2.5 years or so, at the end of which I was, and this is not commonly known, but I had an anxiety attack because I had been working so bloody hard for 2.5 years to get things to move the project forward, and I literally went through about 2-3 years of being clinically depressed over the whole thing, but was still able to function. And our second employee was a secretary, but our third employee was Paul Brown.
Yes.
And Paul was then head of, not head, but he was on air disc jockey, essentially, for a small radio station in Meadville. And I don't recall how I got to meet Paul, other than I think it may have been George Barco, who the cable TV, the lawyer in Meadville, who also was very involved with cable television. I'm trying to remember the name of his company, but I can't.
Well, that became a mega $1 million operation, got acquired. It.
Right.
Who would have thought putting wires on telephone poles to homes would become a multi-billion-dollar industry?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
But he was smart enough to see that and jump into it and do it. And he was very involved with fundraising. And in fact, fundraising in Crawford County moved ahead much more aggressively than in Erie County. I'm not sure exactly why that was the case. Well, I am, because George Barco took it upon himself to be kind of chairman of our activities in Crawford County. And he joined the board of directors. We started to build out the board of directors. And Maurice Colpine, superintendent of schools, joined the educational television board. George Barco did. I can't remember all the people. George DeArmond Channel Lock,
Yes.
and Frank Lang at Talon. So there were quite a group of people from Crawford County, and I think they had they had gotten commitments of, I believe, as much as $50,000 before we had any commitment whatsoever from a business in Erie County, and that changed when literally Maurice Colpine took over as president from John English, and then Maurice, because he was superintendent of schools, I think, was able to pull together, and there was a meeting at the Holiday Inn South, and many of your listeners will remember that Erie used to be home to the headquarters for a number of Fortune 500 companies.
Yeah. Going back to 1898, Zern Industries, then Lord and
Yep.
Amsco in the 20s, and
you got it.
Yeah, we were an industrial capital. Yes,
and they all showed up at this meeting. There were maybe 10 or 12 of the leading business people, and we had an interesting meeting in that I think it was John Cochran who said, well, why do we need a public TV station? Why do we need an educational television station in Erie? Why don't we just build a series of microwave links and bring WQED from Pittsburgh up? And we'll just have that as our public TV station. And I asked John English if I could answer that question. He started, but he was kind of not being very strong in his answer. And then I made a strong pitch saying, no, the station, by having a station in Erie, you're going to be able to do a lot of local things that WQED wouldn't provide that. I mean, yes, you're going to get the national programming in that way, but you're not going to have the capability of doing the local programming. That became a very strong part of our early days, and I know still continues. You still do quite a bit of local stuff.
Absolutely. So going back, your forte was producing and is producing programs. That was your strength back then.
Yes, and very honestly, I saw taking the job as general manager, as being the head of a station, as a way to get myself in a position where I would have the freedom to produce programs. And even before Free to Choose, pushed our team very, very hard. I mean, I don't know how many people are aware of how we were able to cover sporting events locally early on.
Yes.
We didn't have a remote van. And Don Hain, who was our chief engineer, reached the point where at one point he wrote me a very long handwritten letter in which he indicated to me that he thought I was insane. And Don and I have and at one point in our work together, he finally decided that he would go elsewhere. He resigned, and he's been very, very successful in commercial television. And he and I have, I think, are very good friends in hindsight, is maybe one way to put it. Even though we had some very serious disagreements, but here's how we were able to do this, and it's why Don Hain got to the point where he just said, "Enough is enough, Bob." I said, "Look, you've got two cameras, and so all you have to do is we'll buy. I think we bought it for $4,000. One of those office trailers that you see at construction sites.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, Don, we'll buy that, and then we'll install in that 2 or 3 empty racks.
There you go.
The racks that you put the camera equipment in that you needed. And I said, so every Friday, you're going to take all of the camera equipment out of the racks in the TV station,
Yeah.
carry them out, fasten them into the racks in the van, and go off and cover a local high school football game or basketball game, etc.
That's like parting the waves. That's an amazing story.
Yes, exactly right. But that gives you a little sense of how aggressive we were in getting out and about in the community, and we were the ones that first were able to do, cover local sports. Now that was always on a taped and delayed basis, but we then did get to the point where we had the remote microwave hookups, so we were able to do some of these sporting events on a live basis.
What a wonderful story. So you did that from 1966 all the way up to 1982?
Right.
Now let's jump from the past of WQLN into what you do now. Your big project, so to speak.
Well,
the Free to Choose network, the whole concept.
Free to choose. Yeah. Well, everything in a certain sense, in the same way that the opportunity for me to create a television station and then subsequently a radio station, which I also managed to launch. That opportunity opened up by this whole series of happenstance, which led to John English handing me keys to the castle, so to speak. Well, now in the case of the work that I've done since then, that came about again through a series of happenstance, where working with Donald Allstat at Lord Corporation, I developed and ran all over the country to promote it and develop it, an activity in Erie, Pennsylvania called the National Symposium on Technology and Society. And because of Donald Allstat having some contacts, and Donald was very involved with places like Duke University and USC and various other places, he introduced me to Ed David. Ed David at the time, he was head of there was a National Science Foundation, and he was head of it, and then Nixon closed it down. But Ed David was the head at that time of I can't remember. Advo Everett Research in Chicago. I think I've mangled the name of the company. But Ed David was a huge figure in the science and academic community. And he helped me recruit a number of CEOs to come to Erie for this thing, and some important political figures, and some, if you would, members from academia, one of whom was Alan Wallace, who at that time was chancellor of the University of Rochester. And so I got to know Alan because of that activity, which was in 1975. Well, then the Galbraith series comes on the air, and I had by that time become more familiar with the intellectual history of free market capitalism, is one way to put it. Adam Smith, the classical economists, and I knew about them, but I wasn't. I was not a conscious libertarian. I didn't think in those terms until later. I do think of myself, and I have stories I can tell that I think are convincing, that from birth I have been an individualist, and in some sense a loner. That, boy, I just dive into stuff and I move it and make it happen. So anyway, John Kenneth Galbraith series comes on the air, and I think, gee, there ought to be a response to that. And the very same business people who had gathered at the Holiday in the South, they were calling me and screaming and yelling and saying, "Hey, public television is broadcasting this socialist, Ken Galbraith, and boy, is anything being done to show the other side?" And there wasn't, but I was very keen on. And as I said earlier, I took the job to build that station because I wanted to be a producer. Well, here's my chance. And guess what? Alan Wallace, Chancellor of the University of Rochester, whom I had, because of this technology symposium, become friends with, it turns out he was close friends with Milton Friedman. So when I mentioned to him that I was certainly thinking about and had some ideas as to how one could go about responding to Galbraith, he said, "Well, I know the person who would be the right person for you to host that series." And sitting in his office at the University of Rochester, about 10 days after Milton Friedman had been named as the 1976 Nobel Prize winner, Alan Wallace picks up the phone in his office, calls Milton Friedman, tells Milton that I'm there in the office with him, that I have an idea for a TV series, and recommends to Milton that he would meet with me. And Milton instantly said yes, and arrangements were made for me to meet Milton in January 1977. In an apartment at San Francisco where Milton had moved, just moved, because it was interesting. 1976, Milton was 65, and he won the Nobel Prize, and he had to retire from the University of Chicago. They have mandatory retirement at 65.
Wow.
And he had promised Rose, his wife, that when he did retire from the university, they would move to the West Coast. She had been raised in Portland, Oregon, and she wanted to move to San Francisco and live there. So they did. And so I met them. When I met them, they had left their home in Chicago and were living in a sublet apartment in San Francisco. And I met them in January of 77, and in February of 77, they said, "Yes, we'll do the TV series with you."
Amazing.
Now, there was an interesting, might be interesting to you and your viewers, interesting exchange with PBS. I met with the Friedmans 3 times, twice in January and once in February, and then was scheduled to meet with them for the 4th time. As we were meeting regularly to discuss the project, discuss the possibility of doing this, and to see if they would agree to do it. Well, the 4th time, I show up at their apartment, and Milton says, "Oh, Bob, good to see you. Come right in." He said, "Boy, did I have an interesting phone call this morning, and I'm anxious to tell you about it, but I may as well tell you right now that Rose and I have decided that we want to go ahead with your project. We want to work with you to do this." He said, "Now, what the call was that I got this morning was from a person at PBS whom I've known, and they were calling me to say that they felt that they wanted me to do a TV show for PBS that would be a response to Galbraith. In other words,
Hmm.
PBS at the national level, public television, was getting all kinds of pressure from people who thought that they had done the Galbraith series, so they now ought to do something on the other side.
Hmm.
Well, Milton then explained to this individual that I was coming there that night, and that Milton and Rose were persuaded that with the ideas I proposed, and that they were going to go ahead with the project. Well, the response they got from PBS was, the fellow at PBS was, well, Milton, are you aware, Bob, he runs, it's a very small station he runs there in Erie. I think our full-time employees at that point in time was 8 or something like that. Wasn't very many. He said, small station, and he's never done anything like that. And Milton's reaction to him was, that's what Bob told us you would say. And I'd explained to Milton, I said, Milton, I've never done a project of this scope. I shared with him, because he wanted to see some of the things I'd done, the Canada Week at Chautauqua. We had done the YMCA National Swimming Championship. And Paul Brown, I think he was the one who got Buster Crabbe to come in as the commentator for that, and it was one of Paul's big mistakes because Crabbe was a crab. He was to work with. He was terrible, and Paul had to put up with him during that period of time. But I explained to Milton, I said, look, we can hire the best documentary producer in the world to do Free to Choose. And we did. We hired a BBC producer, Michael Latham, who was the top drawer. I said, the one thing I will do for you is as executive producer, I guarantee you that what goes on the screen is going to be what you want and not what the producer wants. But in any case, he certainly, and then about a month and a half after that, I'm already starting to raise money. Then Larry Grossman, who was then president of PBS, invited me to come to D.C. to talk to them about the project. And the only thing I remember from the meeting were, well, two things. When they called Milton, the morning that I showed up that evening and they said they were going to do it, they told Milton that they had $500,000. They thought that they could come up with $500,000 toward the project. Well, two things. When I met with them, that never came up, and there was never a penny of PBS money or CPB money that went into the project. Was number one. And then they also pushed me hard. They said, well, Bob, how do you plan to bring balance to this TV show series you're doing? And I said, I don't plan to bring a balance to it. I see it as balancing the Ken Galbraith series. And I worked with the people at PBS, obviously, had to do that because we wanted them obviously to schedule the program, and we kept them informed, but they had no editorial input into the program, and the debates, by the way, were the idea of our producer from Britain, and I give him credit for coming up with that, because he noticed very quickly how effective Milton was in debates. And he said, Bob, we ought to go with Milton's strength here and do, instead of doing 1-hour documentaries, we'll do half-hour documentaries, and then Milton will debate with a group of people the ideas. And I think that was a masterstroke because Milton was just a phenomenally engaging debater. He never would attack people. and he truly enjoyed the intellectual combat, if you would, but he was never mean about it.
Hmm.
And so he had great fun in the debates, and other people learned that Milton smiled and was very friendly in his debates, but boy, oh boy, was he tough.
So that's the birth of Free to Choose. Now,
Yep.
that was an award-winning PBS television series. It also
Yes, it
sold
was.
a book. It was an international best-selling book.
Oh, it was a huge success. And the book was based on the TV series, not the reverse.
Yes. Okay.
And in the case, for example, Galbraith wrote the book, Age of Uncertainty, and then he and a producer turned it into the public TV series. In our case, we created Free to Choose as a TV series, and then the Friedmans took the transcripts of the documentaries, went off to their summer home in Vermont, Tapatoff, which Free to Choose Network is in the process of purchasing right now.
Oh, really? Oh.
And turning into a center for students to study Milton's ideas. They went off to their summer home in Vermont, probably I think around June of '79, and by September they delivered to Harcourt Brace the manuscript for the book, and as of January 1980, when the series went on the air, the books were in bookstores all over the United States, and it was the best-selling nonfiction book of 1980. Sold over 400,000 hardback copies in English in the U.S. And it was translated into, oh heavens, 25 to 30 languages, and we gave up a long time ago trying to determine what the total book sales would be in all languages. I do know that the only other data point that I have is that in Japan there were 600,000 hardback sales.
Wow, that's fabulous.
Then I went on to try to continue. Left WQLN, set up a separate nonprofit, which initially was named after my father. That was done just to save on legal fees to try to find a name. Anybody who started a business knows you always have to worry about that, and a name that wasn't somebody else's name. So I just called it the Palmer R. Chitester Fund after my dad, in order to just not have to worry about the issue of trademarks, etc. And we have since expanded. I developed a project with John Stossel, Stossel in the Classroom, that ultimately became a separate. Well, it's part of Free to Choose Network, but we did Stossel for 3 years. Then we negotiated a change with ABC and John to turn over a distribution to another organization, and we helped them for a while. And we then went ahead and launched a separate K through 12 service of creating videos for schools, and we have a database. We have an opt-in database of about 300,000 teachers nationwide that are using some of our material. And we have, I think now approaching 60 what we call supplemental videos that generally run about 10 to 15 minutes long on various subjects.
Now, you've done over 500 projects. Brett Stevens' American Retreat, The Real Adam Smith, the 2-hour series.
Yep.
Work and Happiness, The Human Cost of Welfare, Trailblazers, New Zealand. Yeah, explain those programs.
Those are a series then of very recent public television productions.
Yes.
But when I started Stossel in the Classroom, I also made a dramatic change in terms of I fired my board of directors, went out and recruited a whole new board.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I fired them by saying to them, if a requirement for the board of directors is that you have to give $10,000, and everybody resigned except, interestingly enough, Jim Curry Jr.
Really? Huh.
And Jim Curry hung in there and actually served as chairman for 2 years of Free to Choose Network. And one other board member who's still on our board, Dave Jorgensen, California investment guy. But otherwise, I went around the country and recruited. I think within about 9 months, I had recruited 10 people who were willing to put up the 10 grand a year, because that was when I was launching Stossel in the classroom, and they were keen to see Stossel reach out to students. John is just a absolute flat out libertarian in his political position. And by the way, most people don't understand the difference between libertarian and conservative. And a quick way to describe it is that you tend to have people who are all for freedom in the social sense, and they tend to be Democrats. And then you have people who are focused on freedom in an economic sense, and those are the Republicans. Well, the libertarians say, why are you making this distinction? You're either for freedom or you're not. And so libertarians are for decriminalization of marijuana, for example, and in fact, basically are for decriminalization of all drugs, as well as for economic freedom. And I tend to be in that group as a libertarian, not conservative, although it's a blend. It's a blend of conservative thinking as it relates to, at least as it is perceived generally, as it relates to economic freedom.
I just watched again A More or Less Perfect Union with Justice Douglas Ginsburg, and that was amazing. I think we're running that right now, or WQLN is running it.
Yes.
Yes. Tell us about that series.
Well, and we are, in fact, right now working on a follow-on to that on the Declaration of Independence. The series came about because, again, Milton Friedman and Free to Choose opened doors for me. I mean, it put me in a position where the people that I've over the years worked with are significant. At my 80th birthday, my staff arranged a special birthday gift for me. And I show up at the luncheon, and they say, we didn't know what to get you, Bob, so we got you something rather unique. And they hit the play button, and up on the screen comes former Secretary of State George Shultz singing Happy Birthday to Bob Chitester.
Fabulous.
And George and I had met George when we were doing Free to Choose, and we had become good friends. As it turns out, I sang in the University of Michigan Glee Club, so that was in October, and George's birthday is in December, so I quickly hustled around and thought through what can I do to go back to George, and he's a Princeton graduate, and so I went online and got the Princeton fight song, and kind of taught myself the melody, typed out the words, and then I recorded for George a birthday greeting in which I sang the Princeton fight song to him. But I share that with you to just give you a tone, a sense of the range of people that I have over the years met with and had an opportunity to work with. And what you saw, I did the Stossel in the classroom, and And the board, by the way, the board members kind of held me back. They said for 3-4 years, two to 3 years, 3 years it was. They said, you will not do any public television. You're going to focus on building this classroom video service,
Yes.
which I did. But then it came time to do a biography of Milton Friedman, which we did, called The Power of Choice. And the board they weren't about to say, don't do that.
Oh, there you go.
And then that pushed us back into the public television production arena. But we had not been involved in that for about, actually for much longer than that, because I had not done any public television programs for maybe 18 years. I'd done some work for TCI in Denver.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you about that. Yeah,
year and a half. Damn right, and some other coverage. And I'd done a number of other small little projects. Basically, did things just to survive in the period from the 1990s until Stossel in the Classroom, which was around 2000. So in that 10-year period, I was just doing a variety of other things, including the TCI thing. So it'd been quite a while since I'd done anything with public television. But then we did the Friedman biography, we did a biography of George Shultz, and the various other things that you've mentioned. My favorite, I think, of the whole bunch of them was India Wakes, the program we did on the subcontinent, and the economic reforms that have been going on there, and did a story about one of the untouchables, the Dalits, who had become a millionaire, and documented the fact that India was opening up, offering its citizens more opportunities to improve their well-being, and I wanted to encourage that. I wanted people in the U.S. to be aware of it, and very frustrated because it was a very successful show. I urge anyone who has any interest in what the future holds for the world to watch that program, because in my view, what happens in India will determine what happens in the world. What the 21st century will be defined by India and the subcontinent. And the reason is because they are the balance. What happens in India will determine their decision will determine the outcome of the I was going to say battle, I can't think of a better word, of the competition that's going on between the Soviet Union and China and the Western world. And I put it in those kind of broad, I mean, there's all kinds of nuances to it, but basically you can think of it that way. And India, because of its size, it is the largest English-speaking country in the world. There are more people speaking English in India than in the United States. And with economic reform, and we've already seen, you've noticed it, everybody's noticed it, how many Indian Americans there are who are very, very wealthy. Well, they're very talented people.
Yes.
And they came to the U.S. because we offered them opportunity that was not available in India. That has started to change. And now young Indians are tending to stay in India because India is slowly reforming its economic structure so that an entrepreneur in India can develop a country, a new company, and can thrive. And anyone who's familiar with the untouchables, the Dalits, should understand how unusual it is for a Dalit to become a millionaire.
And they still come here for education and entrepreneurship.
They do, but there's another secret there.
Hmm.
The Indian Institutes of Technology, and I don't know how many there are. There are at least maybe 10 of them spread throughout India. And I don't know the history of this accurately, but sometime in the 1990s, India decided to set up these institutes,
Hmm.
and they set them up all over India. Now, I'll give you a data point. One way to rank higher education is how many of their graduates get how many dollars of venture capital money. And I'm gonna have to guess at one part of this. The top 10 universities in terms of the amount of money their graduates have received from venture capitalists. Stanford is number one. Berkeley's number two. And this is where I'm a little uncertain. I think MIT is number three, but number four is the IIT system in India. So that, yes, they come here for education, but also they come here, most of them, already with a bachelor's degree or the equivalent from one of these institutes, Indian Institute of Technology. So it was that change, that development of this whole system and they're all engineering focused. They're all science and engineering focused, the IITs. So they became a feeder for a lot of very, very well educated in the basics of science Indians who immigrated to the United States and started companies, and several of them are billionaires now, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. We're talking with Bob Chitester, founder and executive chairman of the board of the Free to Choose Network. Let's move forward a bit. I think we missed something. You produced a series called The Idea. You founded actually The Idea Channel, which is a video library. This is like an encyclopedia, a video, and a three-dimensional encyclopedia. Yeah.
That's interesting because that's an interesting way to describe it.
It seems it's an outstanding idea. The collection itself had to have been a real challenge. Getting all the speakers.
It is a reflection of me in the sense in that I was just very curious about the following question. Mm-hmm. What's it like? And of course, I say I was curious. I had experienced this, so I thought, gee, it would be nice if the average person could have an opportunity to see what it's like when two top intellects talk to each other. In other words, we are aware of people who get Nobel Prizes and who do all this work, et cetera. Mm-hmm. But what are they like? How do they come up with their ideas? So I got this idea that I would record conversations between two intellectuals, two scholars. And the rules were very simple. First of all, I told them, the scholars, that I would not edit in any way what happened. Wow. And they liked that very, very much because many, many scholars get frustrated that they agree to be interviewed and their 30-minute interview gets cut to 8 minutes.
Yes.
And any relationship between what they wanted to say and what ultimately went on the screen was not very good. And so many of them I had to persuade because they'd had bad experiences with media, journalists who had not been straightforward with them. But so as a result, I just started to ask scholars, Nobel Prize winners, etc., if they would sit down together, and then the rules were very straightforward. One of them would agree to make an opening statement of a minute and a half, 2 minutes, 3 minutes about something they were both interested in, and then from that point on, they would just have a extemporaneous discussion. They weren't doing a lecture. They were just like the two of them in their office having a private conversation. And I again, back to my example with Don Hain and the racks and finding ways to do it, I literally bought and developed a high 8 recording studio or recording facility that would fit in one of those large metal suitcases.
Yes. I was going to ask you, how did you manage this technology?
And that's what I did. I traveled all over the country with this one suitcase.
Amazing.
In which I had the 2 high 8 cameras. I had some lighting that I had developed, a little lighting system.
Yeah.
The trickiest part of it was the audio, getting the audio so I could record from the two people. But I went around the country, and I would walk into somebody's office. I'll say, hey, we'll record it in your office. We'll record it in your home.
Fabulous.
And I'd go in. I'd set up the 2 cameras. They'd come in. They'd sit down. I'd tell them, hey, this is how we're going to do it, and away we would go. And I would I would move back and forth from the cameras, from one camera to the other, and as you know, and then I could zoom in one of the cameras to a close-up, and get some variety, and then we edited the two together, and ended up with what is the resulting conversations that are in the Idea Channel. And anybody that really is interested in what scholars think about, and the collection of people is certainly skewed toward people who I would call free market capitalists. I wouldn't say advocates as much as they've done the research and they gather evidence of how it works, what works, what doesn't work. I'd say that certainly the majority of them are the George Shultz types, etc., but not all. I mean, I did interviews with people like Christian Deduve, who won a Nobel Prize in medicine. One of my favorite people on the face of the earth actually came to Erie, and we produced some things at WQLN with him, and that was Norman Borlaug, the Nobel Peace Prize winner.
Yes, yeah. Bob Chitester, we only have a couple of minutes. Summarize, how can I put this? How do you feel about all this? I mean, this has created a huge intellect. You're a huge intellect. You have all the knowledge and all the sum of all these interviews inside your mind. Do you feel there's more to do?
Oh my heavens! there's always more to do, and here I am wondering how long I'm going to be alive and functioning, and yet I'm working right now to try to establish a beginning of a major project on freedom of religion, and working on that. Also have developed a 5-part series. I think we're going to do just 3 hours though, and condense it, on free speech, and we have $1.5 million grant from the Templeton Foundation toward the cost of that particular project. So I'm in fact, I just keep saying to myself, Bob, you're not going to be able to see these things happen. So some of them, and I'm just trying to tee them up, if you would, to try to get them to the point where the institution itself, the team of people that we've built at Free to Choose Network, will go forward with them. And And then looking back, Tom, I would put it this way: I'm in awe of what I've accomplished, and humbled by the fact that I'm really amazed that I did it. I look at my career and what I accomplished, and often with a little sense of disbelief was, how did I get that? How did I make that happen? How was I able to do that? And my life has not been one that was planned in a sense of a career path. I just bounced from opportunity to opportunity, fought my way back from failures, and just kept motivated by this curiosity that I once described to Irv Cockle, president of Barron College a long time ago, and was chairman of my board, chairman of WQLN's board for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And he once asked me, he said, "Bob, why? What's your goal? What's your goal?" And I referred him to William Bradford's diary about the Pilgrims, which I had read maybe a year or two before this conversation with Irv occurred. And I said to him, I want to be able to take things like William Bradford's diary and present them in a way that they're accessible to large numbers of people through mass media. That's what's driven me. And on one occasion in Tallinn, Estonia, walking to lunch with a young man whom we had documented the story of his building the Estonia Piano Company up to be a competitor with Steinway. Mm-hmm. And I'm in Estonia, and Estonia is one of the most free market capitalist countries in the world, because their first prime minister after the Soviets got out read Free to Choose, thought it was a good guide to develop a nation, and went ahead and did it. And I'm walking to lunch in Estonia, and I then, I think I may have even admitted to the fellow that I was there with, Indrik Lowell, I said, now it's real for me how much impact I've had on the world.
On that note, we're going to humbly thank you for this wonderful hour. We really appreciate your visit, Bob Chitester. And
happy to do it, Tom. Thank you.
And thank you very much.
I'm Nina Totenberg. The best drama and often the hottest ticket in Washington is a seat at the U.S. Supreme Court. And pinch me, I'm there. It's not just that I'm a witness to history. I get to be the eyes and ears of our listeners. As Mark Twain once put it, I like a good story well told, and that's what we do here at NPR. So thanks for listening to this station.